Elderly billionaire spends every Christmas alone. Until a waitress and her little girl knocked every Christmas, the world seemed to glow with warmth and laughter. But not for Walter Harrington. From the towering windows of his snow-dusted mansion, he watched neighbors hang twinkling lights and families gather around crackling fireplaces. But inside, his grand halls were silent, echoing only with the ghost of memories long past. Once, his life had been filled with laughter, his children's giggles, his wife's soft humming as she decorated the tree. Now at 82, Walter's mansion was filled only with ornaments, unopened gifts, and the relentless ticking of a grandfather clock that seemed louder with every passing year. The world had labeled him the billionaire recluse, a man so rich that he could buy the moon, yet so lonely that no one dared intrude upon his fortress of solitude. Over decades, friends had drifted away, business partners had passed on, and even his children, grown and busy with lives of their own, had forgotten the warmth of visiting. Each year, Walter would sit in his study, nursing a glass of scotch, staring at the fireplace, wondering if anyone still remembered him as more than a ledger, a bank account, a headline. But this Christmas would be different. It began with a knock on the grand oak door, a hesitant, almost shy knock, muffled by the winter wind. Walter frowned, surprised. Who could possibly come here? He never entertained visitors. Yet as he slowly shuffled to the door, leaning on his cane, he noticed the tiny, hopeful faces peeking from behind the heavy red scarf of a young woman. A waitress, and a little girl no more than 6, clutching a small, worn doll. Their eyes held something Walter hadn't seen in years, warmth, hope, and the kind of fearless kindness that ignored the grandeur and reputation standing before them. "Hi, sir, we're sorry to bother you," the woman began, voice trembling slightly. "But it's Christmas, and we don't have anywhere to go. Could we maybe come in for a moment?" Walter's heart, long encased in the frost of solitude, skipped a beat. Something inside him, a memory, a feeling he thought had died, stirred. He hesitated, staring at the tiny girl, whose big, trusting eyes met his without fear. And for the first time in decades, he felt the possibility of warmth, of laughter, of family, right here on a snowy Christmas Eve. Walter Harrington had spent 70 years building empires, yet no amount of money could build the one thing he now longed for: connection. The Harrington mansion, with its sweeping staircases, golden chandeliers, and walls lined with priceless art, had never felt emptier. Christmas had always been a quiet time of reflection for Walter, but over the last decade, it had become a reminder of everything he had lost, or perhaps everything he had pushed away. He shuffled toward the door, his cane tapping against the polished marble floor, echoing through the empty halls. Snowflakes clung to the heavy doormat as if unwilling to leave the warmth of the indoors. Walter opened the door slowly, suspicion written across his lined face. Standing there was a young woman, maybe in her late 20s, bundled in a threadbare coat, a scarf too thin to keep the winter from biting. Her hand rested protectively on the shoulder of a little girl, whose wide eyes seemed to drink in the grandeur of the mansion as if it were a fairy tale come alive. "Hello, sir," the woman said again, her voice soft yet steady. We were just passing by and thought maybe we could come in for a little while. It's Christmas, and, well, we don't have a place to be." Walter stared. Hospitality had never been his practice. His fortune had always kept people at arm's length, and yet something about her tone, the genuine vulnerability, the flicker of hope, pierced through decades of isolation. "Why, come here," he asked, the words harsher than he intended. "There's nothing here for visitors." The little girl tugged gently at the woman's sleeve. "Please, mister," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just for a little while. We don't want to be alone." Walter looked at the child. Her innocence, her courage, it was disarming. Memories came flooding back, the sound of his own daughter's laughter, the smell of pine needles from Christmas trees past, the warmth of a wife who used to hum carols while placing ornaments. Walter's throat tightened. "Very well," he said finally, stepping aside. "But just for a moment." The young woman's face lit up with a grateful smile, and the little girl clutched her hand as they stepped into the foyer. Walter closed the door behind them, the sound of the latch echoing like a final barrier against his old life of loneliness. They wandered through the mansion with wide-eyed wonder, the little girl trailing her fingers along the staircase banister, the woman quietly marveling at the art and decorations. Walter, who had always measured his life in balance sheets and investments, felt something strange, a sense of lightness, a flicker of joy. "Do you want some cocoa?" he asked awkwardly, shoving aside the formalities he had perfected over decades. "Or perhaps cookies?" The woman shook her head, smiling warmly. That would be wonderful, sir. Thank you. Walter retreated into the kitchen, something he rarely did, and started to prepare a small tray. The smell of cocoa and freshly baked cookies filled the air, bringing an unfamiliar warmth to the mansion. The little girl's giggles echoed, bouncing off the high ceilings as she played peek-boo behind the large Christmas tree. You know, the woman said, sitting at the dining table with her hands folded, we didn't expect anyone to be kind, especially someone like you. Walter paused, stirring the cocoa, unsure whether to take offense or smile. Someone like me? Yes, she said softly. A billionaire with no family around. Most people like you keep to themselves. Walter looked at the girl, who was now perched on a chair, swinging her legs and humming a Christmas tune. Her innocence and fearlessness disarmed him entirely. Maybe. I've just been waiting for someone brave enough to knock, he said quietly, more to himself than to them. And just like that, the ice of decades began to thaw. The mansion, once a cold fortress, seemed to breathe. For the first time in many Christmases, Walter realized that perhaps wealth was not the measure of life, and perhaps a knock on the door could change everything. The warmth of cocoa and the faint aroma of cookies filled the room, but as the minutes passed, Walter felt a tension he hadn't anticipated. The young woman, whose name he learned was Clara, and her daughter, little Emma, were polite, yet there was a subtle unease in their eyes. Walter noticed the way Clara hesitated before answering questions, how she kept glancing at the door as if expecting someone to appear and shatter this fragile peace. Emma, Clara whispered gently, remember what I told you. Don't touch anything too fragile. Emma, of course, ignored her entirely, climbing onto the plush sofa and pressing her tiny hands against the polished glass coffee table. Walter cleared his throat, his old-world manners battling his growing fondness for the child. She seems spirited, he said, trying to inject humor, though his voice carried a subtle edge. Much like someone I used to know. Clara smiled faintly, a shadow crossing her face. Yes, spirited, but she's been through a lot. We've been on the streets for a while, you know. It's not easy to find a safe place at Christmas. Walter's eyes narrowed slightly. The words hung in the air like a challenge he hadn't expected. His mind, honed by decades of business battles, immediately considered logistics, rules, and boundaries. But beneath that was something far older and softer, a protective instinct he had long buried under layers of wealth and pride. On the streets. Walter repeated, his voice a mix of disbelief and concern. All this time, you had nowhere to go. Clara looked down, biting her lip. We've been surviving, sir. Just trying to make it day by day. Emma's just, well, she deserves a little normalcy at least once a year. Walter's fists clenched at his sides. Part of him wanted to retreat, to shut the door on reality, and retreat to his comfortable isolation. Yet another, far stronger part demanded action. He couldn't just sit there sipping cocoa while these two, this child, lived without the warmth he had taken for granted all his life. He began, then stopped, unsure how to phrase centuries of detachment into words of comfort. I suppose you'll need food then. More than just cocoa and cookies. Clara's eyes widened. You don't have to, sir. Really, we don't want to impose. Impose. Walter's voice rose slightly, not with anger, but with a rare, unrefined urgency. You think this house, this mansion, exists to be admired from the outside? You've come here, and I will not send you away hungry. Emma, sensing the shift in mood, scooted closer to her mother. Mommy, did he just yell? Clara placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. No, sweetie. He's just excited. That's all. Walter cleared his throat, realizing the unintended harshness of his tone. Excited, he muttered, almost laughing at himself. Yes, let's call it that. But the tension didn't fully lift. There was something unspoken between them. Walter, accustomed to negotiating contracts and mergers, found himself in unfamiliar territory. How do you provide comfort without overstepping? How do you open your home to strangers without losing the fortress you've built around yourself? He watched Clara glance at the ornate clock on the wall, then at Emma, and realized she was weighing whether staying was safe or foolish. You have rules here, Clara said quietly, and we don't want to make trouble. She faltered, unable to finish. Walter sighed, sitting heavily on the arm of a nearby chair. Trouble? You call this trouble? A little girl, afraid of the world, seeking shelter, and her mother trying to protect her? No, that is not trouble. That is what Christmas should be. Emma's eyes lit up at the mention of Christmas, and she clapped her hands. "Really? You mean it's okay for us to stay?" "Yes," Walter said, his voice softer now, his eyes on hers. "Is more than okay. You will stay, and we will have dinner, and you will leave with full bellies and perhaps hearts a little warmer than when you arrived." Clara's lips trembled, a mixture of relief and disbelief crossing her face. "Thank you, sir. You don't know what this means to us." Walter felt a lump in his throat, something he hadn't experienced in decades. "I think perhaps I do," he whispered. "I've spent many Christmases alone, and I have known the cold of silence. But perhaps it is time that changes, if only for tonight." As the snow swirled outside, blanketing the world in white, the mansion slowly transformed from a palace of silence into a home with potential. Tension still lingered, shadows of fear and uncertainty hovering near the edges, but Walter could sense the first cracks forming in the walls he had built around himself. A night that began with hesitation and doubt was now teetering on the brink of something miraculous: connection, warmth, and perhaps a little family. And as he watched Emma's small hands trace the edges of a Christmas ornament, Walter realized that sometimes the most unexpected knocks at the door could awaken the deepest parts of the heart. The dinner table was modest, a carefully prepared meal by Walter himself, who had not cooked for anyone in decades. Yet there was something grounding about the act, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, setting plates, that made him feel more alive than he had in years. Clara watched him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. She had seen many wealthy people, many men of power, but Walter Harrington's actions tonight carried a sincerity that startled her. Emma, perched on a high chair, was already eagerly inspecting the plates. "Is this really for us?" she asked, her wide eyes sparkling. "You made all this?" Walter smiled, a small, shy curve of his lips, unused to softness in public moments. "Yes. It may not be fancy, but it's made with care. And care, little one, is far more important than fancy." Clara swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Thank you for this. Really, we didn't expect anything like this." Walter gestured for them to sit. "Expectations are overrated. What matters is what we do with the time we have." They ate quietly at first, the clinking of silverware against plates filling the mansion's grand dining room. Walter watched Clara's delicate hands as she broke bread and Emma's animated chatter as she described tiny victories of her day. It was a scene so ordinary, yet so profoundly moving. In that moment, Walter realized how much of his life had been ordinary but empty, filled with transactions, power moves, and business conquests, but devoid of the simple joys of presence and connection. After a moment, Clara cleared her throat. "Sir, I don't want to impose on your life. I know this is your home and your time, and it's kind of strange, us just showing up like this." Walter looked up, meeting her eyes. "Do you know what's strange?" he said slowly, choosing his words. "Spending decades in a house full of riches, surrounded by silence. That's strange. You and Emma, you remind me that life is meant to be shared. That warmth is more valuable than wealth." Clara blinked, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Sir, call me Walter," he interrupted gently, as if erasing years of formal distance. "Tonight, at least, let's not speak in titles. Titles can wait. Tonight, we are just people." The words seemed to unlock something in Clara. She placed her hand over Emma's, squeezing it tightly. "Walter, it's been so long since someone said that to me. Since anyone treated us like people, not problems." Emma tilted her head, curious. "Mommy, are we in trouble?" "No, sweetheart," Walter said softly, reaching out to touch the little girl's hand. "No trouble. Not here. Not tonight. Here you are safe. Here you are welcome." The mansion, once a symbol of isolation, seemed to breathe around them. Walter realized that for the first time in decades, he was not observing life from a distance. He was part of it. He laughed quietly as Emma made a joke about the giant house ghosts and the way the chandelier swayed when the wind blew. Clara chuckled too, a pure, unguarded laugh that made the walls feel warmer. Yet beneath the laughter, a shadow lingered, an unspoken truth. Clara had not only brought Emma here seeking temporary refuge, they were escaping difficulties Walter could not yet fully grasp. And he knew, with a sinking sense, that this moment of peace could be fragile. After dinner, they moved to the sitting room by the fire. Emma curled up with her doll, yawning, while Clara sipped a cup of cocoa. Walter settled into his armchair, his cane leaning against the side, and felt a rare vulnerability. "Clara, tell me the truth. What brought you here, really? Why knock on my door?" Clara hesitated, glancing at Emma. We had nowhere else to go. I lost my job recently, and everything just fell apart. We couldn't go to family, they're distant, and we didn't know where to turn. I saw your house, and I know it's strange, but I thought maybe you could help, even for just a night. Walter studied her, the lines of worry and fatigue etched on her face. He felt a surge of emotion, compassion, sorrow, and something deeper, almost protective. He realized that money alone could not solve life's problems, but perhaps his time, his presence, could. You were brave, Walter said finally. It's not easy to knock on a stranger's door, especially one you think might turn you away. That courage is something I admire, and courage deserves kindness. Clara's eyes glistened with tears, and she reached over to grip his hand. Thank you, Walter. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. In that moment, a fragile trust was formed, a bridge spanning decades of loneliness and hardship, connecting two lives that had long been apart from the world. Emma snuggled closer to her mother, sensing the shift. Walter realized that tonight they were not merely guests, they were a family forming in most unexpected way. And for the first time in years, Walter Harrington understood something he had long forgotten. That generosity was not just about wealth, but about presence, empathy, and the courage to open one's heart. In the warmth of the firelight, surrounded by laughter and quiet conversation, he felt the snow outside and the cold of the world diminish, replaced by a fragile, glowing hope, a Christmas miracle in the making. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Harrington mansion, illuminating dust motes dancing lazily in the air. Walter woke unusually early, the silence of the house now feeling less like emptiness and more like anticipation. He could hear soft giggles coming from the sitting room. Emma and Clara were already awake, moving about as if the mansion were suddenly theirs, not just a temporary refuge. Walter dressed slowly, taking care with his old, stiff joints. Something had shifted overnight. The laughter he had heard, the innocent, unguarded joy of a child, had softened the edges of his solitude. He walked to the sitting room cautiously, afraid to intrude, but knowing he had to witness this new life stirring in his home. "Good morning," Walter said, his voice breaking slightly with emotion. "Good morning, Walter." Emma chirped, jumping from a sofa to run toward him. Her tiny arms wrapped around his legs, and Walter felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in decades. Clara followed, smiling softly, her hand brushing against his shoulder in silent thanks. Walter knelt to Emma's level, hugging her gently. "You've got quite the energy for someone so small," he said, trying to inject humor to mask the lump forming in his throat. Emma giggled. "I'm excited. It's Christmas, and we're not alone." Clara's smile faltered for a brief moment, the weight of reality pressing in. "Walter, we don't want to overstay our welcome. We're grateful for your kindness, really." Walter shook his head, rising to his full height. "You misunderstand, Clara. This is not about courtesy or obligations. You are welcome here, not because you asked permission, but because it is right. And, perhaps, because I have waited far too long for someone to knock on this door." The words hung in the air, charged with vulnerability. Clara's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Walter, I don't know what to say. It's more than we ever expected." Walter gestured for them to sit. "Say nothing. Just be here. Be present. That is enough." The breakthrough, however, came unexpectedly, as breakthroughs often do. Walter decided to show them a part of the mansion rarely visited, a small, hidden library that had been his refuge during years of loneliness. Dust-covered books lined the walls, some with cracked spines, others yellowed with age. Walter pulled a small volume from a shelf, brushing off the dust, and handed it to Emma. "This was my daughter's favorite," he said quietly. She loved stories about faraway lands and heroes who never gave up. Emma's eyes widened as she accepted the book. "Can you read it to me?" Walter hesitated. Reading aloud had been a forgotten pleasure, a ritual abandoned when life had grown too busy, too serious. But looking at Emma's expectant face, he felt the chains of his old life fall away. He opened the book slowly, reading the first few lines, his voice rough at first, then growing steadier with emotion. Clara watched silently, tears glistening in her eyes, as Walter's voice brought the words to life. Emma leaned against him, captivated. "Tell me more, Walter," she whispered. And so he did. For the first time in years, Walter's mansion was filled with the sound of storytelling, laughter, and shared wonder. Clara sat beside him, feeling the weight of the world lift as she listened to the elderly billionaire breathe life into a story of courage and hope. The breakthrough was not just in the act of reading, but in the realization that connection, real, unguarded connection, was possible even after decades of isolation. Walter paused, closing the book after the final line. And that, little one, is why heroes never give up. They keep searching even when the world seems dark. Emma's eyes shone with wonder. Like you, Walter. Walter felt his chest tighten. Perhaps, he said softly, but only because someone knocked on my door. Only because courage reached out to me. Clara reached over, placing her hand on Walter's. And you reached out to us, Walter. You opened your heart, and it means more than we could ever say. In that moment, Walter realized the breakthrough was not just for them, it was for him. The walls of the mansion and the walls around his heart had begun to crumble. He understood, finally, that love and compassion were not weaknesses to hide behind, but forces powerful enough to heal both giver and receiver. Outside, the snow continued to fall, glittering like diamonds on the ground. Inside, the mansion thrummed with life, a little family forming from strangers, laughter mingling with warmth, and hearts slowly mending in the glow of a fire that had nothing to do with heat and everything to do with human connection. Walter looked at Clara and Emma and said with a soft, steady voice that carried decades of regret, hope, and newfound joy, "Perhaps this Christmas will not be the quietest I've ever known. Perhaps it will be the most meaningful." And for the first time in years, Walter Harrington believed in miracles again. Not miracles of wealth or power or influence, but miracles of love, courage, and the simple, unassuming magic of a knock on the door. The next morning, Walter awoke to the soft, muffled sounds of Clara and Emma bustling in the kitchen. Normally, the silence of the mansion had been his comfort, a cocoon of solitude, but now it felt stifling when absent. He dressed quickly, feeling an unusual urgency in his chest, and made his way downstairs. The aroma of coffee and cinnamon wafted through the halls, an unspoken welcome that tugged at his heart. "Good morning, Walter." Emma shouted from behind the kitchen island, her face glowing with excitement. "We're making breakfast." Walter smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling in a way that hadn't happened in years. "Breakfast, huh? I hope you don't mind a few lessons in omelet making from an old man who burned toast more often than not." Clara chuckled softly. "Walter, you've already given us more than enough. But if you want to cook, Emma would love it." The little girl ran over, dragging a chair to reach the counter. "Teach me. Teach me," she demanded, clapping her hands. Walter looked at them both, and in that moment he realized something that shook him more than any business failure or financial loss ever had. He wanted to be part of their lives, not just for a night, but for more. His chest tightened with the weight of both fear and hope. After breakfast, as they sat around the table, Emma's voice piped up. "Walter, do you celebrate Christmas alone every year?" Walter nodded quietly. "Yes, for many years now. I've grown used to it." Emma's little face scrunched with concern. "That's sad. Christmas is for family." Clara's hand went to Walter's. "It's not your fault, Walter. Life, circumstances, choices. But maybe it doesn't have to stay that way." Walter looked into her eyes, seeing both truth and possibility reflected there. He swallowed hard, the old walls he had built around himself shaking for the first time in decades. "You're right," he admitted softly. "It doesn't have to stay that way. I suppose I've been waiting for someone brave enough to break through all of this." Emma bounced in her seat. "That's me. I'm brave." Walter chuckled, a genuine sound that made Clara smile. "Yes, I see that clearly. And your bravery has reminded me of something important. It's never too late to change, to care, to be part of someone else's life." The turning point came later that afternoon, when Clara hesitated by the doorway, holding Emma's hand tightly. "Walter, I don't know how to say this, but we can't stay forever. I have to find work, somewhere safe for Emma." Her voice trailed, unsure of how he would react. Walter felt a pang in his chest, the thought of losing them stirring an unfamiliar panic. "Clara, don't leave yet. Please. Let's figure something out together." Clara looked at him, surprise and uncertainty in her eyes. "Together?" "Yes," Walter said firmly, though his voice wavered slightly. I can offer more than a night's shelter. I have resources, connections, time, and for the first time in years, I want to share it. You and Emma have reminded me what life is for. I don't want to waste it alone anymore." Clara's lips trembled as tears pooled in her eyes. "Walter, are you serious?" He nodded slowly, deliberately. "Yes. Serious. I don't want to be alone this Christmas, or any Christmas after this. I want to help. And if you let me, I'd like to be part of your lives." Emma's face lit up like the tree in the mansion's grand hall, and she squealed, "Really, Walter? Really?" She jumped into his arms, hugging him fiercely, and for the first time, Walter felt the kind of joy that could only come from being wanted, needed, and loved. Clara swallowed hard, overwhelmed. We don't know what to say." "Thank you, it means everything." Walter took a deep breath, feeling the turning point not just in the day, but in his entire life. The fear of vulnerability, the fear of opening his heart, was now replaced by a sense of purpose. For decades, he had built walls to protect himself from disappointment, from loss, from loneliness. But Clara and Emma had shown him that sometimes taking the risk to care, to welcome, to connect was the greatest victory of all. The snow outside continued to fall, but it no longer felt cold. It felt alive, sparkling, full of possibility. Walter glanced at the fireplace, where the embers glowed warmly, and realized that the mansion was no longer a lonely fortress. It was a home filled with hope, laughter, and the promise of new beginnings. "Clara," Walter said finally, his voice firm but gentle, "if you're willing, I would like to make this our tradition. Not just Christmas, but every day we can. We can build something together, a life, a family, even if it's unconventional." Clara nodded, her eyes shining. "Yes, Walter. I'd like that too." Emma clapped her hands, jumping onto Walter's lap again. "Yay, we're family now." Walter laughed, a full, heartfelt sound that filled the mansion's high ceilings and echoed into every corner of his once empty life. For the first time in decades, he knew that the turning point had come. The loneliness that had haunted him for years was giving way to connection, warmth, and the kind of love that didn't come with contracts, boardrooms, or wealth, but with courage, trust, and open hearts. And in that moment, Walter Harrington understood something profound. It was never too late to rewrite a life, to embrace change, and to welcome miracles into even the coldest, loneliest corners of the heart. That evening, the Harrington mansion was alive with a warmth Walter had not felt in decades. The grand halls, once silent and imposing, now hummed with the soft sounds of laughter, conversation, and the little footfalls of Emma darting from room to room. Walter watched her twirl around the Christmas tree, her small hands grazing the ornaments as if each one held a secret magic. Clara followed close behind, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the twinkling lights, her smile more relaxed than it had been in years. Walter sank into his favorite armchair near the fireplace, the crackling embers casting a gentle warmth across the room. He held a mug of cocoa in his hands, the rich smell mingling with the scent of pine and cinnamon. He felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, a joy he hadn't known since his wife had passed. Tonight, he wasn't a lonely billionaire in a cold mansion. Tonight, he was part of a family, a small, imperfect, yet perfect family that had chosen to step into his life and awaken his heart. Clara came over, setting a small plate of cookies on the table beside him. "You know," she said softly, "I didn't think someone like you, someone so wealthy and powerful, would let someone like us in. But you did. You've given us more than just a warm place to stay. You've given us hope." Walter's eyes softened. "Hope is something I thought I had lost long ago. But sometimes it only takes a knock at the door and the courage of strangers to remind you it's still there." Emma climbed onto Walter's lap, clutching her worn doll, and whispered, "Walter, I like our house. Can we stay here every Christmas?" Walter chuckled, stroking her hair gently. "Every Christmas, Emma. And maybe even more than that. This is your home, too. You and Clara, you belong here as much as I do." The little girl beamed, and Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Walter, you really mean that?" "I do," he said firmly, his voice carrying a newfound warmth. "Life is too short to spend alone. And from now on, I refuse to spend another Christmas by myself. Not when I have you two in my life." As the evening wore on, Walter, Clara, and Emma settled near the fireplace. They sang carols, their voices mingling in harmony, imperfect but full of heart. Walter's laughter, once rare and distant, now rang freely, echoing through the mansion with a vibrancy it hadn't known in decades. Emma's tiny hands drew hearts in the condensation on the window, tracing patterns as snow fell softly outside, blanketing the world in a pure, gentle silence. At one point, Clara leaned back, her head resting on Walter's shoulder, and whispered, "You've given us a second chance, Walter. I don't know how we'll ever repay you." Walter smiled, feeling a profound peace settle over him. "You don't need to repay me, Clara. Seeing you both happy, safe, and smiling, that is more than enough. That is the greatest gift anyone could ever receive." Emma looked up at him with sparkling eyes. "Walter, can we do this every year? Can we decorate, bake cookies, tell stories, and laugh together?" Walter nodded, a tear escaping the corner of his eye. "Yes, Emma. Every year. And not just on Christmas. We can make every day a little brighter. Every day a little warmer. That's what family does." As the night deepened, Walter reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The unexpected knock, the courage of two strangers, the laughter, the tears, and the slow thawing of a heart that had been frozen by time and solitude. He realized that wealth, power, and grandeur were meaningless without love, connection, and shared moments of joy. Clara and Emma curled up beside him on the sofa, a small, contented family, and Walter felt a sense of belonging he had never imagined possible. The mansion no longer seemed like a cavern of silence, but sanctuary of warmth, laughter, and life. The fire flickered, casting dancing shadows across the walls, and Walter knew that he had finally found the gift he had long thought lost, a family not born of blood, but of kindness, courage, and the willingness to open one's heart. "Thank you," Walter whispered quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "Thank you for reminding me what it means to truly live." Clara pressed a hand to his, and Emma nestled closer. In that moment, no one outside the mansion mattered. There were no contracts, no wealth to tally, no cold world to contend with. There was only warmth, love, and the miracle of a Christmas transformed by the courage to care and the grace to welcome. And as the snow continued to fall softly against the windows, Walter Harrington finally understood the true meaning of Christmas. Not the gifts, the decorations, or the grandeur, but the joy of togetherness, the power of kindness, and the unshakable magic of opening one's heart to others. For the first time in decades, he was not alone, and he would never be alone again.